Are you struggling with getting your music to sound a little bit more deep, a little more interesting, having more emotion? Then maybe you have forgotten to work the dynamics. Hi there, this is Samuel. Nice to see you here. Today I want to talk about dynamics, an important step that a lot of beginner composers forget. If you are more experienced composers, you probably know what I'm going to talk about in this video, but stay tuned because there's a little trick later on that will help you quite a bit. So what are dynamics? Simply put, it is a volume, but it's much more than that. For example, if you are a singer or a horn player or any instrument really, you naturally have dynamics. You can't just play with the same volume all the time. It would be exhausting and it wouldn't sound very interesting. So it's very important that you do this with virtual instruments as well. You can't just set a patch and have it on the loudest volume and then just go. It doesn't sound good, it doesn't sound natural, and it becomes more stale. To do this well, it's really important to have faders, or at least a mod wheel. Now, most keyboards have a mod wheel, but I would recommend you to have at least two faders that you can use separate of each other. If you don't have this on your keyboard, you can buy a really cheap unit. Let's take a look at a viola and see how that sounds if I don't touch the dynamic controls at all. That could work if you wanted it to be really intense, and also you wanted every attack to be really loud. But just adding in the dynamics, I'm going to control that with a fader, or the mod wheel if you have one of those. You will see that instantly it's much more interesting. Dynamics is basically how the timbre is changed. It's not just volume, because on most instruments, when you play louder, the instrument sounds different. So on forte fortissimo, or really loud, the instrument vibrates, sounds a little bit different than on piano. So see it not just as a volume, but also the intensity. Now, expression is more or less, on most instruments I know, pretty much a volume control. And it's quite important to use. A lot of people forget this, but it really makes a huge difference. So I could control this with another fader, but here's a tip. Maybe you haven't tried this out. Connect the expression dynamics to the mod wheel as well. Control these both at the same time, because most of the times you want them to work together. You can always go in and add that later, but this will save you a lot of work, and you can have one hand on a fader and then one hand on the piano. And it's actually really recommended to record everything like this, rather than go in and change the dynamics by hand later. It saves you work and it gets more emotional. Let's try this out. And in some cases, depends a little bit on your library, when expression is all way down, the volume disappears, meaning you can end the string when you want rather than lifting the finger. And sometimes that has a little bit of a smoother effect. Now, some libraries also have vibrato control, and I actually would even add that to your mod wheel. It depends a little bit on the library. This one particularly, I don't notice a difference that much. But why not start like this? And then you can always add that later. Because in general, not always, violins tend to have a bigger vibrato when they go louder and a softer one when they go softer, obviously. This will make it more inspiring when you write the music. It won't be so mechanical. Now let's also look at the sustain patch. Let's say I have a simple chord here. That works pretty well on its own, but if I actually use the dynamics as well, listen. It's immediately much more interesting, and especially if you have longer chords. This is very important, especially if you write music for TV or movies, where sometimes you want a very emotional impact in the background that doesn't interfere with the action too much. You see, music, especially media, you don't want it to be so interesting that you don't watch the movie, but you still want it to be impactful. So, I hope you see the importance of using dynamics in music to get that depth and that emotion. Now, I would go even further and start to develop a habit of using your right hand on your keyboard and your left hand on the mod wheel or on your faders and keep it there. Now, obviously, if you play piano, you need to use both your hands. But in general, a mistake a lot of piano players do, and a lot of composers use the piano, is that they play their instruments like a piano. Most sections in an orchestra have no more than 3 voices, and most of the time they only have 1. So it makes no sense to use both hands. Rather have one hand, play the melody or the simple chord, and then use your mod wheel. That's it for this video. Go out and get yourself some faders if you don't have any, if you're really serious about orchestration on a DAW. It's very important. It will save you a lot of frustration, guaranteed. Nice to see you here. Hope to see you soon again. Take care.